We are in something of a golden age of Fire Emblem ROM hacks. It seems like every week there is some new ROM hack that is highly recommended by every single one of my friends and sweeping the internet by storm, and I'm all here for it. The Fire Emblem community is lovely, and the fact that we are getting more games without having to wait for Nintendo's release schedule is kind of phenomenal, and we get them all for free. However, the sheer number of them can be a little bit overwhelming, especially because what everyone is looking for in a Fire Emblem game is going to be very different. Which is why I think it might be helpful to start a new series of Romhack Recommendations, where I will go over ROM hacks that I personally greatly enjoyed, talk about what aspects I liked from them, and try to give you an idea of what to expect going in, since these can often be 40+ hour commitments. And up first on the list is a hack that I only recently discovered after a friend of mine repeatedly recommended it, and that is Fire Emblem Vision Quest, and oh my god, we are starting with a good one. This is easily my favorite ROM hack that I've ever played, and might even number among my top Fire Emblem games. Saying that it feels like a mainline Fire Emblem is almost an insult, as it does a few things that I don't think a mainline Fire Emblem would be able or willing to do, both in its story and gameplay, but we'll get to that. I am going to be splitting this video into sections, in my opinion, in order from least spoilery to most spoilery, but if you are looking to go in completely blind, as I did, I give it the biggest recommendation I possibly could. Go play Vision Quest right now. However, if you want to know a little bit more about what you're getting into, I will be covering the general map design, the overall game structure, the characters, and then the story in that order. So strap in and let me gush about one of my favorite games that I've played in 2023. Part 1. Map and level design. Arguably the most important part of any Fire Emblem game is the map design, and Vision Quest does not fail in that regards whatsoever. Maps are tightly designed and fun to engage with, and have extremely varied objectives so that they don't end up blending together, as often ends up being the case in vanilla Fire Emblem games when you're just doing kill boss or route over and over. Depending on the point in the story, you will face a variety of objectives, such as escaping maps while being chased by enemies too strong for you to take on, escorting green units to seize points, surviving against enemies under overwhelming odds, or routing maps within a very tight turn limit, just to name a few examples. Additionally, the majority of maps have several side objectives, such as recruitable characters or valuable items, and these tend to be on fairly strict timers, encouraging you to push forward as opposed to turtling up and taking things safer, which simultaneously contrasts and complements the other key feature of the hack, and that is that enemies tend to be very threatening. In fact, it's not uncommon even as early as Part 1 to start surrounded by multiple strong enemies that you feel pressured to kill before turn 1 enemy phase, as they are capable of 1-rounding or 2-rounding your squishier units, and even some of your tougher units as well. This dynamic presents a, to my mind, brilliant push and pull, as you are simultaneously trying to rush forward in order to get to the side objectives before pirates destroy villages or thieves steal treasure chests, while also trying to not overextend because enemies are incredibly threatening. If you want to get all of the side objectives on the map, you are typically going to have to split up into 2 or 3 different groups, which can stretch your resources pretty thin, but it is usually worth it, as most of these side objectives tend to be quite valuable, as they either provide you with good units, significant cash income, or, most importantly, rare effective weapons, which are at a premium, as the game doesn't give you many on its own, and using effective weapons to allow your units to more easily deal with the incredibly strong enemies can make you feel less overwhelmed by them, especially in the mid to late game. However, lest you think the maps are over once you've accomplished a couple of side objectives and gotten rid of the initial wave of enemies, that is far from the case, as the majority of maps will also have incredibly tough reinforcements, adding to the feeling of time pressure as you want to make sure to clear out the first wave of enemies before you're dealing with the second, but never feeling like they are unfair. There are no ambush spawns in this game, and whatever reinforcements are coming tend to be extremely specifically telegraphed. Like, I'm talking very close to fourth wall breaking. Oftentimes the boss will say something along the lines of, "We're getting overwhelmed, good thing there's going to be wyverns showing up from the right hand side of the map, and then after that there's going to be some cavaliers from the south." You typically get these warnings 1 to 2 turns ahead of when the enemies are going to spawn, and since they are not ambush spawns, you are able to prepare for them and take them on your turns on player phase. However, at least in my experience, the enemies are tough enough that they still remain threatening even when you have the advantage of knowing where reinforcements will spawn and being able to prepare for them. The last aspect of map design that I want to touch on before we move on to the general broad strokes gameplay is the bosses. As I think Pantam did a phenomenal job designing Fire Emblem bosses, which is a very hard thing to do, especially without access to multiple health bars. Bosses are sufficiently stat-crept so as to be threatening and very unlikely to be one-rounded even if using effective weapons, which is already an improvement over some of the easier GBA games. However, one way in which these bosses differ from the traditional Fire Emblem boss is that for the most part, they are not stationary. While there are some exceptions to this rule, the majority of bosses in Vision Quest have a behavior where they will start out stationary and then 7 or 8 turns into the map let out some sort of line about how we're being overwhelmed, now I need to take the field, and suddenly they start moving. This is always indicated to you by the UI. If you highlight the boss, you can see whether they have movement range or not, and they will never move on a turn where they didn't previously have movement range. Additionally, they will give you a line of dialogue to indicate that they are moving now, so it shouldn't catch you off guard if you're paying attention. However, it does represent a timer that you're on, and once again, that pressure to play fast as opposed to turtling up, because the boss will start coming for you if you take too long. While it is definitely possible to hyper-train a unit in order to be able to one-round bosses, it's something that is very unlikely to happen, and most bosses have access to 1-2 range, or at the very least both 1 range and 2 range weapons. This means that it is hard to cheese them from 2 range, as their ability to move and their ability to attack you from 2 range prevents this for the most part. Again, there are a few exceptions of bosses that are stationary for whatever reason, but these are far rarer than the bosses that you actually have to engage with on an even playing field. And I'm all about that. Part 2. Overall game structure. Many of the chapter design decisions I just finished talking about are actively informed by the overall game design decisions that flow through all of Vision Quest. For example, I mentioned that there are a lot of side objectives and they feel worth getting as opposed to just side objectives you can ignore because they're not a big deal. And one of the big reasons this is Vision Quest is very stingy with weapons and items and even money. You occasionally get story mandatory gold dumps and all units will join with an inventory. However, this is not enough to last for the entire playthrough, meaning that if you want to restock even on iron weapons, you need to go for the chests and stealable gems. In addition to money management being tighter, the fact that so many enemies were incredibly hard to kill means that effective weapons as prizes for getting into chests or villages or whatnot are extremely valuable as well. Vision Quest also, at least from my experience, encourages you to experiment with units and drop the ones that aren't working out for you. For example, a lot of early game units get personal weapons that assist in their early training arc and potentially let them catch up to or surpass the mid-game squad. However, if their personal weapon breaks and they have been stat screwed or haven't been adequately stat blessed, you often get a unit who can replace them and perform even better than they currently are. An example of this from my first playthrough is the early mage girl Lara. She has a pretty good magic and speed growth, which honestly is all that a mage wants, and she has a personal wind tome that is light and higher might to allow her to more easily double and secure kills that another mage wouldn't otherwise. I hyper invested in her because I love early mages. Unfortunately, mine got a little bit stat screwed, and so by the time her tutor Vernon joined us, he just had better stats than her around the board, so Lara gets to sit on the bench and Vernon becomes the new Team Anima user. Now, stats aren't the only thing that make units unique in Vision Quest, and every unit has a personal skill that they start with, as well as a class skill that they will gain by reaching level 15 in their unpromoted class. These skills can allow the units to feel distinct from each other beyond just the stat thresholds. If we go back to our earlier mage example, Vernon, the sage, has spur magic, meaning that he's going to allow people adjacent to him to deal more damage using magical attacks, whereas Lara has Miracle, which in Vision Quest functions closer to Sturdy from Pokemon or Guard Adjutants from Three Houses, instead of being chance-based. The reason for this is that Vision Quest actually has no chance-based activation skills. Any skill that you have is either guaranteed to have results or conditional under certain instances. As for what classes are available, for the most part it is the standard GBA classes aside from your 3 lords. However, Vision Quest does have playable soldiers and as a result includes the promoted class Halberdier, which is treated like the lance variant of a Swordmaster, Berserker, or Sniper, gaining a crit bonus as a result. Vision Quest does not make the crit bonuses inherent, but instead Swordmaster, Sniper, Berserker, and Halberdier all gain a 15% crit bonus upon reaching level 5 promoted. Thieves can promote to rogues in this game, and rogues have the ability to pick locks, but they also have a skill that they gain at level 5, which is Steal Plus. This is functionally Path of Radiance stealing. You can steal weapons as long as you have con that is higher than the weapon's weight, and the weapon is not equipped. Additionally, you can steal staves. This is incredibly useful because, like I mentioned earlier, the game is pretty stingy in terms of giving you free weapons, items, and money, so being able to steal them from enemies, even if you just plan on selling them for more money, is very good value. And there are frequently enemies that have multiple weapons or have a staff you can steal, so you're going to be getting more value out of this than you would in the average Path of Radiance playthrough. The crit skills and Rogue Steal Plus are the only new skills you will gain while in a promoted class. However, there is one other aspect of the class system that I haven't talked about yet, and it is, to my mind, the most interesting and innovative one. This is a system that the Hacks creator Pandam refers to as inverse branched promotions. How it works is instead of you promoting and choosing between 2 different promoted classes to go into, instead there are 2 separate unpromoted classes that will promote into a single promoted class. So for example, one of the characters you get in Chapter 1 is a bow fighter, and if you use an Earth Seal to promote him, because Earth Seals are the only promotion item in this game, he will become a warrior. However, later on, you get an Axe Fighter, and if you use an Earth Seal to promote your Axe Fighter, they will also become a warrior. Upon promoting, rather than getting a lousy E rank in the new weapon type, they actually get C rank in the new weapon type, meaning that they feel like they're equally competent at both weapons in their promoted class. The only difference being your unpromoted class, you start out with whatever weapon is assigned to that. Similarly, there are Axe Mercenaries and Sword Mercenaries, which promote into Hero, Anima Mages and Staff Mages, which promote into Sage, etc., etc. I think this is a really cool concept, and I've never seen anything like it before, with the possible exception of Monks and Clerics in Fire Emblem 7. But Fire Emblem 7 is a bad game, so I'm not going to give credit for it. Pandam did it first. A few other notable features are Armor Knights get 5 movement, which is nice because you really want bulky units since the enemies tend to be extremely threatening. Additionally, there is free trading a la Thracia FE5 or FE3, and supports build in my personal favorite way that supports have been handled, the Fire Emblem 9 style, where instead of having to do any actions together, units simply have to be deployed together for X many maps and they will unlock the support conversation as a result. Due to the GBA limitations, you can't activate the supports in the preps menu or the home base or how you would do it in Fire Emblem 9. You do still have to initiate the conversation on map, but I do still think that this is the best way to do supports. And as we'll talk about in the character section, I'm a big fan of the support conversations in this game. However, I've been saving the 2 biggest features for last, and the first one is you get Warp in Chapter 4 and Rescue in Chapter 6. Both of these staves have 15 uses, and you get them so early in the game that it allows for a lot of flexibility in reaching those difficult side objectives, while also causing you to try to balance your resources because it is such a valuable resource that you don't want to waste a warp use on something that's not going to pan out. Especially because Hamurn actually comes very late in this game. So those 15 uses of Warp and Rescue are really all you've got until quite close to the end game. They are incredibly useful, and if you are skilled at utilizing Warp, you are going to find a lot of the challenging levels much easier because you make use of these powerful tools. But if you use it too often, then you won't be able to Hamurn it and use it for some of the final maps basically for free, as a result of how late Hamurn comes. Much like everything in Vision Quest, it's a very interesting push and pull, and I know that in my first playthrough I fell for the pitfall of not using Warp often enough because I was afraid that I would break it before getting the Hamurn staff. In my second playthrough that I'm doing as we record, I've used warp much more liberally because I know when we're getting Himmern, but I'm still holding back sometimes because it comes so late that I don't want to waste the uses I have available. But to my mind, the biggest and my favorite aspect of this game's design is that it has the split army structure ripped straight from Radiant Dawn. It functions slightly differently. There are only 2 armies instead of 3, and there's no Part 4 mess where you split the units into 3 separate armies afterwards. However, you do have control of one army, and then switch over to control of another army before finally both armies combine with each other. The extra cool thing about this is that both armies feel like they have their own identity based on what's going on in the story, which allows me to gracefully transition into Part 3, where I talk about the story. Part 3. The story. So I've decided to talk about the characters and story all in the same section because it's kind of hard to talk about them separately, and let's be honest, the people who don't care about story spoilers also don't care about character spoilers. With that being said, this has one of the best stories, possibly even the very best story of any Fire Emblem game I've played, including fan games and ROM hacks. In the beginning, you control a small group of poor commoners who have to resort to stealing from the rich because the rich have hiked up taxes to an unreasonable extent. So for the first few maps, you are either explicitly stealing from rich people, fighting off other thieves in order to con the rich people into rewarding you, or fleeing from town guards. However, eventually you realize that enough is enough, and rather than continuing to steal just for scraps, you decide to overthrow the current ruler of your section of the empire. This leads you to ally yourself with another noble who initially appears to be a man of the people. He promises to lower the taxes, and when you, spoilers, succeed, he actually does do that. But slowly the story shifts to be about power corrupting and how he is always scheming and trying to get into even more control, eventually leading to, he hopes, become the next emperor. All the while, there's a dark cult moving in the background that has nefarious plans and causes a false flag war to occur. There's a lot more going on than I'm able to talk about in that brief summary, and I don't want to spoil everything, but the writing and character work is phenomenal. And while the most work clearly went into the main characters, especially Titus, who is a masterstroke of character writing, even the side characters and comedy characters tend to have very good writing to them, either in charming conversations with each other in supports, or just the way in which they introduce each other. For example, a character who instantly won my heart was the axe mercenary Honeydew. If you stand on a staircase, she'll spawn and offer to join you, but then she enters the map as a red unit. This gave me a heart attack because I thought there was some sort of programming error, but a couple of seconds later a new cutscene plays where she says, "Oops, I think I'm forgetting something," changes to a blue unit and then says, "There we go, that's better, my bad." It was very funny, and yes, it broke the fourth wall, but in a way that was cute and not cringeworthy, at least to my opinion. And Vision Quest does this sort of stuff all the time. It has a really good job of balancing the serious political intrigue that's caught my attention with legitimately funny moments. Most of these funny moments are as a result of the Gaiden chapters, since those tend to focus on the side characters instead of on the main characters. However, some of them happen in support conversations, and some of them just happen in regular main story dialogue. For example, Mango, another character I'm a big fan of, introduces herself with a prolonged cutscene where she explains the origin story of her starting gear. After all, there's a real important reason that she has a flame sword and a steel blade, and they are all very lore important to her. It's very funny. However, the side characters aren't just limited to the comedic beats. There's actually some really charming dialogue interactions between them in supports. For example, my favorite character in the game is Nazar, and in part that's because I got an incredibly blessed one in my first playthrough, but a large part of that is also because he has one of the most wholesome supports with Onisim that I've ever seen. Nazar is an illiterate pirate who wishes that he could do things other than be evil and raid cities. Onisim is a former pirate who gave up the sail in order to join the cloth and repent for his sins. He notices that Nazar is sad about not being able to read and slowly teaches him how to do so over the course of their support chain. It's really quite adorable, and I was very happy to learn that they actually have a paired ending that, at least for my interpretation, was implied to be gay. And while I haven't gotten every paired ending, it's my understanding that there are multiple confirmed queer characters in this ROM, which are handled much better than Fire Emblem mainline games do. Also, to my great joy, not all of the paired endings are romantic. There's some great platonic ones, and some of my favorite characters end up in platonic paired endings, which is just a huge W to me. Overall, when it comes to both story and characters, they're very subjective things, so it's possible that you'll enjoy them less than I did, but I do think that it is top quality in both departments and would highly recommend not skipping the cutscenes. Although, if all you care about is gameplay, the gameplay is also top-notch. Oh yeah, and this game actually has an est, which is very nice. We haven't really had one of those in Fire Emblem in a long time. I mean, I think Rosado was supposed to be one, but he kind of functionally doesn't work as an est. His level's just too high. He doesn't gain experience fast enough. It's sad. So anyway, that's my recommendation. Go and play Vision Quest. The link to download it is in the description, as well as Pandam's YouTube channel. Pandam is the mob's creator. Let me know in the comments what you think. Did you play Vision Quest? Do you like it as much as I did, or are you lower on it than me? Are there aspects of the game that you think I didn't mention that you really enjoy, or that you don't like? Do you have any other ROM hacks that you would recommend? I'm always looking for recommendations, so be sure to let me know. And no matter what, have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.